Hi, Sally Hancock here, and I have a different type of project today, and I am going to work on my jean circle quilt. I started this a long time ago and kept thinking, you know, all the jeans I was throwing away, I was thinking, oh, those are, I wish I could make something out of them, and I found on Pinterest a circle jean quilt that looked like just the ticket, and so I started it a long time ago and it sat for a long time, so now I want to finish it. So I thought I'd show you how I did it. So this is just like I cut the top part of the jean off, and then just use the leg. And what I'm using for a template is just like, you know, a coffee can lid of the 10-pound lid. And so I just put it down, and I used a Sharpie. If you are worried about the line showing, then you can use a fabric marker pen. So I just drew a circle around like that, and then cut it out. And you know, you could trim just inside the circle, and then your markings won't show. But if you mark it on the wrong side of the fabric, even if you still can see your mark, once you have it sewn up, it shouldn't show. Okay, so now that I have my circle cut out, I need to draw a square inside the circle, and that will be my sewing lines. So on the website that I found this on, she said to cut a template out of like a ice cream bucket lid, or you could just use like a cereal box, or, you know, whatever, and make the square just come to just peek over the edges of your circle. Just barely, like that. And so my circle is 6 1/8 diameter, and my square is 4 1/8. And so I think the way I figured out how big I needed my square was I just folded I folded this and then measured the radius. No, that can't be right, because that's 3 inches. Now I don't remember how I figured it out, how big to make my square. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. I remember it was confusing, but boy, I sure don't remember. But if you have you could do a 6-inch circle and a 4-inch square. Or, as I did, a 6 1/8 and a 4 1/8 for your square. So you'll go on your wrong side and draw your lines. Now before you do that, you want to think about your grain, because that'll be your stitching lines, and you'll stitch it, you know, so it'll end up being a square. So you want to think about how the grain of your fabric is. Do you want it like this? Do you want it more like this? Or however, think about how you want it before you draw your square. I like it like that. So center your square on there, and then just trace that. And again, you can use something that will be erasable, but you aren't going to see this, so it's fine to have it show. I mean, you know, to be something permanent. I just found it was easiest to use a Sharpie because I cut out a lot of circles. Okay, so once you have all of these done, I decided that I needed, before I sewed anything together, I needed to decide how I wanted it to look, because I have, you know, I have all these different washes. And so depending, you know, how you put them, did I want a pattern? Did I want it random? Whatever. So you need to think about it. So what I decided was I had more of the dark wash than the light wash. So what I decided to do was make kind of a block. So I sewed 4 of the circles together, and what I decided to do was do one. See, I accidentally drew that on the wrong side. So I did 4 circles of dark wash, and then I made kind of a patchwork. So like 2 dark and 2 light. So say, you know, so kind of a checkerboard, that's what I'm trying to think of. So that they look like this. So I have half are like this and half are like a checkerboard. So to make my blocks, you just take your 2 squares, or your 2 circles, sorry, and then line up these lines. I just put my thumb and kind of pinch it and then see where that is and circle that around. And I think I took a pin and poked it through to make sure that I was lined up, and then same thing on this side. And so then you just stitch right here, and I'll go do that and show you what that looks like. Okay, so I sewed 2 of the circles together, and so I just sewed right along that square that I marked, and so now I have 2 sewn together. So what I did to make like the checkerboard, I just put them opposite corners. So then you can just sew your 2 circles together to make the block. So what you need to be careful of in the center, you kind of need to make sure that you're sewing at least this very edge right here, because if not, you end up with a little hole in the middle, and maybe you don't care about that, how that looks, but I was afraid it would fray and come apart. So just see on this one, this line is just there. That one didn't quite line up. Make sure your seams are lined up. That's more important than these lines on your squares. But do make sure, like, so don't sew and have this big gap. Make sure you're sewing to where it's just right at the top of that first seam. I hope that makes sense. So I will sew these 2 together and be right back. Okay, so I have this seam sewn, and so I didn't quite go on where I'd marked the lines, but it's more important to keep those seams together and make sure you get that very end in your seam. So then you press open your seam allowance, and then you will and then you'll sew your blocks together in rows, like, you know, all the way down, like here and then here, and then, you know, sew your rows together. And then well, first, sorry, after I got all my blocks sewn, and let me tell you the size, I decided to do a full-size quilt, which was 54 inches by 75 inches. So that was going to be 7 of these blocks across and 10 down. So 70 of these squares. Oh, and I forgot. I was going to tell you how many circles that I cut out. That would be, so 70 times 4. So it's 280 circles. So I binge watched, I don't remember what I was watching, but if you have a show on Netflix that you're binge watching, it's perfect to cut out all these circles. And I used mostly old jeans. I did have some denim fabric that I used, and I had this canvas that I thought would be cute, and I thought about it, but I decided I didn't want that in my quilt. So these were the last 2 squares that I needed to finish all my 74 circled blocks. And so then I decided to lay it out and figure out, how I wanted to have them on the quilt, because this is how it will look in the back. And then on this side, you have a square, and this is 4 1/8. So what I did was I cut out squares of fabric that were 4-inch squares, because you need it just a little bit smaller than in here, because then you're going to take your square of fabric, pretend that's fabric, and then you'll have all your seam allowances folded in like this, and then you'll zigzag along here. And that will finish your quilt. So a lot of ones that I saw had just a piece of fabric, no batting. I wanted this quilt to be one to take to the park and have on the grass. So I wanted something a little bit softer. So I am going to cut squares of batting to put underneath my fabric squares before I sew it together. I am going to be cutting out my squares that go on the quilt, and so I just have some fat quarters here. Fat quarter is 16 by 20 inches about. Okay, so first you need to make sure that your fabric is square. So I like to take the salvage edge and put that along. And it's easier if you fold it, and you can cut through 2 layers at once. So normally you don't really like to sew with the salvage edge, but this particular method I'm doing you don't really sew this fabric at all, you just sew the denim over it. So I'm just going to leave the salvage edge and line up the salvage edge, and then line the fold along one of my lines here, and my ruler. Actually, let's see, I don't want to put it at the 19.5. Really wish it was 20 inches, because I'm cutting 4-inch squares. That will make it to where I can't have quite as many. Okay, so that edge is good, and now I want to do this other edge. I think I will fold it into a square, and let's see. Oh, that's so close to. We'll do it at a half again. Okay, and then trim that up, and now I've got a nice square piece of fabric. So I'm just going to leave it folded in half, and then cut 4-inch strips. So let's cut it at 16. 12. 8. And 4. And it's so close to getting another one, but that one won't be wide enough. So now that you have your strips, you can lay them out on top of each other. And lined up perfectly here. Normally in quilts, you need to make sure they are perfectly the right size, but in this quilt, it's much more forgiving. So they don't need to be quite exact. And cut these into 4 inches. And then this one will be done. 16, 12, 8, and 4. And I'll probably save those, but I don't know what I'll use them for. But anyway, so out of one fat quarter, I got 16 squares, 4-inch squares. So some of the fat quarters were they were really nice and evenly cut. Some of them though, gosh, they are really off. So if they're really off, you could grab opposite corners and pull it, and that can sometimes even it out a little bit, but this one was really off. Let's see if that did any good. That made it, see, look how uneven this one is. So I won't get nearly as many squares out of this one. Okay, so here is my quilt. I just need to add these last 2 squares that I just sewed. And so how I decided to lay it out was to go do like a checkerboard and a solid, let's see, solid, checkerboard, solid, checkerboard, solid. So I laid them out like that and then looked at, there's some that are much darker, let's see, like much darker, and then there's some that are quite a bit lighter. And so I liked, I like to spread it out. Some of them like, let's see if I can, this one, was white. And so I just had a variety. So I put them and laid them out how I liked them. And then let me zoom in just a little bit. And so to keep it in order, I pinned little numbers on each row so I could keep them straight. And then I just gathered them all up, and it's been gathered up for a while, and so I decided it is time to finish this quilt. And so to make this size, like I say, there's 10 rows this way and 7 across that way. So that makes it, well, they're 8-inch blocks, just about a little bit more than 8 inches each square, each 4 circles that are sewn into a block are 8 inches, so they're 7 times 8 is 56, so that's 56 by 10 times by 80. So that's the size of this quilt. So now what I need to do is I have all these squares that I cut out. So however many circles, that's how many squares of fabric you need. So now what I need to do is I need to lay out, I need to turn everything over and lay these squares on top and decide how I want this design to be. So there it is so far. Let's see if I can. I've started to kind of try to make it look kind of random, but I think this will take a while. So I'm going to turn off the camera and maybe I'll just lay them all out and then arrange them after I have them all laid out. So I'll be back. All right, I believe I have my quilt laid out how I'd like it. Now, I had about, from here up, I had the squares cut. And so I had extra fat quarters that I cut up, but I realized most of them were red. And so over here, there is a whole bunch of red. But I'm okay with that. I kind of shuffled some around, but it was hard. And then over here I did orange mostly. And I'm okay with how it looks. I kind of did, you know, I just look at it and think, oh, there's a giant patch of one color, and tried to kind of shuffle it around, but for the most part, just left it like this. So now I am ready to, let's see, oh, I need to cut out some batting squares, so I will show you that. So here is my batting. I believe I got this at Joann. I got it a long time ago, and coincidentally, this is the same design on the packaging that I am doing on my jean quilt. So that is what the design looks like. So it's a low loft, and oh, that is all in French. This is a crib size, but I also have some leftovers from when my daughter made a quilt. So this is really a good way to use up some of your scraps. So I am just going to, I don't think I want to cut them out all at once, because that's a lot of squares. So I think I'll do some and then do some sewing, and then when I need more, I will cut more and go like that, because the idea of cutting out over 200 squares of batting all at once right now just doesn't sound very fun to me. So I'm just gonna maybe cut out enough for a couple of rows. So I'll finish doing that. I'm just cutting them into 4-inch squares, and then I'll start sewing and show you how I'm gonna do that.